I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Hello again, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. It's our first look at what is on the front pages of tomorrow's papers. But first, our top stories. The head of Lebanese militant group Hezbollah has threatened retaliation against Israel for the deaths of at least 37 people in a series of explosions across the country. The Prime Minister has insisted he is completely in control of Downing Street, despite his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, being paid more than him. And Post Office campaigner Sir Alan Bates has blamed government flim-flam artists for dragging out financial redress for victims, calling the scheme a gravy train for government lawyers. Hello there, time then for the press preview. It's our first look at Friday's front pages and seeing what is making the headlines tonight. With me, columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Very good evening, nice to see you both.
Nice to see you.
So let's take a look then at some of the front pages. We'll start with the Eye, leading with warnings that the Middle East is moving closer to a regional war as tensions rise between Israel and Hezbollah. On the front of The Guardian, vows of retribution from Hezbollah's chief Hassan Nasrallah against Israel, despite the nation not yet claiming responsibility for the exploding communications devices that left 37 people dead. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer's claim that he's still in control, despite leaks revealing his Chief of Staff is paid more than him. Well, that features on the front of The Telegraph. What planet are they on? Asks The Star in relation to one MP's defence of the freebies, worth thousands of pounds, accepted by Sir Keir Starmer. Claims that Rachel Reeves has been given a £10 billion boost by the Bank of England to stave off cuts and tax rises. That's on the front of tomorrow's Times. Fears over how the elderly will cope if winter payments are taken away makes the front page of The Express, while allegations of sexual assault against former Harrods owner Mohammed Al Fayed, who died last year, leads the Metro. And accusations that woke culture is threatening British identity from Robert Jenrick, that features on the front of the Mail. And don't forget, you can scan that QR code that you see on screen during the programme. Check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And to do that, Steve Richards and Salma Shah. So let's get cracking. Lots to talk about. Salma, why don't you begin for us with the front of the Eye. Middle East steps closer to regional war. I mean, what a couple of days it has been. Where on earth are we now?
Well, as we've discussed previously, we are back to a very dangerous situation where we are potentially looking at a huge escalation in the region. And I'm sure your viewers already know that there have been these very audacious attacks, allegedly by Mossad, by the Israeli state, that have reached pages and walkie-talkies. In response to that, the Lebanese president has come out and talked about how there's going to be retaliation and retribution. And now you can already see Western diplomatic forces really trying to urge caution and to calm things down. Whether this actually is an escalation is yet to be seen, but we are seeing movement with Iranians actually talking about this being an appalling act, the phrase an act of war being used. So we are actually in quite a difficult situation at the moment, and preventing it might not be as easy as it has been previously.
Yeah, leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, saying Israel has crossed all the red lines. It's a declaration of war.
This is so dangerous for the reason, partly, that Salma mentioned when she widened it to mention Iran and others, because this is where all the danger points interconnect. Iran is close to Russia, then you get into the whole Ukraine situation and so on. And as we've discussed here before, you know, I view these things with quite a lot of alarm because the First World War had this kind of thing where things that seemingly didn't connect suddenly did. and we were in a terrible global conflagration. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen at all, but the Middle East has been a tinderbox for many, many years, and there are signs that it's coming alight. Now, hopefully that won't happen. David Lammy, you've been leading tonight on his calls for a ceasefire. But the agency these governments have with the Israeli government, not the whole of Israel, many in Israel who oppose what the Israeli government are doing, seems to me to be really limited. You know, I think it would just be ignored as tensions intensify in the Middle East. So I think it's a very dangerous moment.
Yeah, David Lammy in Paris with Anthony Blinken and others. Front page of The Guardian, Hezbollah chief vows retribution against Israel after a wave of attacks. And, of course, the Foreign Secretary telling Brits in the region, Salma, that they might want to consider leaving and leaving soon.
Yeah, so this speaks to the fact that there's a lot of tension there, and there's been lots of colour from this reporting talking about how, you know, people are feeling on the ground as well, and, you know, the difficulties that are going to be faced and fear that's going to be faced. I just want to go back to one point. There is a real difficulty around the diplomacy of this, because we've had Benjamin Netanyahu basically criticise the British government's position on stopping sending weapons to Israel. And I think that is also going to make the situation difficult. So if we are asking for a diplomatic effort on the part of Western powers, it is going to be limited because of the actions that we've taken. And so, you know, there is a real sort of pushback from the Israeli government, from the Israeli Prime Minister, at any of those attempts. So I think we are actually in a really difficult position on that side as well. I mean, we don't have a great voice, I think, in this. It's the US that matters.
The US is always the key. But that shouldn't mean that Israel basically has a veto on the British government's approach to what arms it sells to them. And that's the delicacy, that maybe Britain loses whatever leverage it has, minimal. But at the same time, it cannot just say, right, because of that, we will supply Israel with what it wants when we see the consequences.
No, I agree with you entirely.
So,
the British government needs to take decisions in its interest and in the interest of its people.
Or it's a moral judgment.
And its responsibility as an international actor. But the way that this conflict has unfolded, it's been tribal, and it's about taking sides. It has been right from the top all the way down to the bottom by anybody who feels affected by this. So I think that is an element that we actually do need to understand, and does colour some of the negotiations or some of the discussions that will happen behind the scenes.
Yeah, and the UN Security Council meeting tomorrow to discuss what is an increasingly worrying situation. Let's move on to events here in the UK then. Front of the Daily Telegraph, I am still in control, says Starmer as feud erupts. The honeymoon period didn't last very long, Steve.
They haven't really had a honeymoon. I have to say, though, about this headline, I mean, there are issues going on behind the scenes, which hopefully we'll have a chance to explore. But this headline is one of those classic traps. And remember, a lot of the papers we're about to look at are Tory supporting and loathe Labour. However, so Keir Starmer gave a whole series of regional interviews this afternoon. And because of the whole stuff about Sue Gray and all the other internecine briefings, he was asked, are you in control of number 10? Now, imagine if he said, I'm not actually. You know, it's total chaos. Of course he was going to say, I'm in control. But then the headlines come out, Starmer crisis, he has to say so early on that he's in control. Well, he was asked, and he had no other option but to say, I'm in control. Having said that, the fact that there is this feverish questioning is not solely media fabrication. You know, the briefings are going on against Sue Gray, his chosen chief of staff, and her people and allies are fighting back. And it's very unusual for that level of briefing internally to happen in a government. They won a landslide a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago. It's very early on, and in the build-up to their first party conference. Very odd, don't you think so?
And the Daily Telegraph also using language like this, civil war breaking out at the centre of his government. I mean, is that fair? Is that too strong, or do you think it is really serious?
So I think it's very serious. I think it's serious for two reasons. One, the message that it sends is that we are actually not focused on delivery, we are focused on our internal squabbles that feel very petty in comparison to what
you wonder if most people actually care how much Sue Gray ends?
The fact that it's on the front page of a lot of papers today means that it has had some cut through. I mean, we're about to look at the Daily Star, and
We'll do it now if you want. Let's
do it now because the Daily Star is talking about this. That is what I would describe as cut through. And, you know, it is exactly, I mean, there's a reference to the business secretary there, who I haven't met. He's actually quite a nice person, but they refer to him as a moron. That says, you know, 91 grand a year MPs deserve a bit of relaxation. You know, they've gone out and they've said all these things that they think are perfectly sensible, but they haven't really understood the political context that they are in. They are not able to sort of take that sort of approach to these issues because the election was all about that tone of being whiter than white, a bit holier than thou, I might say. And it's sort of crumbling. And so you can't have these kinds of stories, civil war, pay, freebies, going about and still retain your credibility.
Let's unpick a bit of that. I think civil war is a massive exaggeration. A civil war happens over policy when there is a real significant breakdown over policy, like with the Tories over Europe. And that's when a government is in deep crisis. This isn't a civil war. However, the tensions are real. The fact that people are briefing, knowing that it will cause damage to the government. There's one advisor quoted as saying, Gray is the only pensioner to benefit from this Labour government. Well, that attacks the government on about 8 different levels. That person should be sacked. That person won't be identified. So the briefings continue and they should stop. And in that sense, Keir Starmer does need to get a grip on the messaging and the way they deal with these newspapers who are instinctively hostile. But quite often these Tory papers usually give Labour, on the rare occasions when they win elections, a kind of honeymoon, you know, where they realise their readers might have voted Labour, they wanted the Tories out. But this time they are gunning for them very early, and you've got to be very careful to avoid giving them ammunition.
Well, let's bring in the front of the Mail, which is certainly on the attack. Starmer on the rack, Salma.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, when the Mail gives you just sort of simple bullet points, it sort of, I mean, let's just go back to this point on civil war. Number 10 aids in open revolt. Perhaps revolt is a better word for it, because you are talking about one significant person who is supposed to have responsibility and other people that are supposed to be working towards Sue Gray not being satisfied or happy about it. That actually speaks then to the Prime Minister's judgment about the way this person has gone in, the way that controls and structures are in place, and the way that his team is running. It is dysfunctional right from the get-go. So he is going to have to step in at some point because, yes, I acknowledge that these are centre-right newspapers, but the fact that they are being briefed, the fact that this is spilling out into the open is absolutely appalling.
The Mole's got a problem with Sue Gray rather than the Prime Minister, you think?
Sorry, who's got a problem?
The Mole, whoever's leaking.
Well, I don't think it's not just one person by all accounts.
And by the way, I think it might be civil servants as well as political appointees, because she worked in the civil service before, and there's quite a lot of stuff that's left over from all of that. But where it does come down to Keir Starmer is he is the elected Prime Minister with the power. I always remember when papers became obsessed with Alistair Campbell. So Alistair Campbell's humiliating Tony Blair with all his power. Well, Tony Blair gave Alistair Campbell that power. And clearly, Keir Starmer rates Sue Gray and thinks she has an experience of Whitehall that a new government needs and would have otherwise lacked. So it's up to him, really, how much power she has. And the attacks on her really end up being an attack on him. But she's been the story now for a long time, and that's dangerous for the government more widely. Yeah,
especially given that we've got the party conference as well around the corner.
Which should be, for them, a celebratory event. They've won a landslide, having been out of power for 14 years. But I can't remember the build-up for a party conference with a new government just elected with these kind of tensions. and in that sense, he does need to get a grip. But these headlines about how humiliating that he's had to assert his control. Well, he was asked about it in a series of interviews.
Yeah,
so
it's a good point. He didn't really have much of a choice.
He had
Thank
no
you both
choice.
very much for the moment. Plenty more still to come from tomorrow's papers, including this on the front of the Times. Their headline: Reeves told to reverse cuts after 10 billion boost. Stay with us. Back in a couple of minutes.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent. I've reported from around the world and around the UK.
I'm Mark Stone, I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, DC. And beyond the United States, from across the world, I report on the biggest stories.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I remember some of the worst of the violence here.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Trust in politics is at an all-time low. What's going wrong, and can we fix it? It's from Liz. She wants to know, why is there still no sign of the Labour Party electing a woman as leader?
It's sort of embarrassing. You know, it takes a very strong man to be leader, but it takes an even stronger man to support a woman for leader.
If you want to be mean to politicians, crack on. The activists that go out and make elections happen, I kind of feel just don't be horrible to them. Be polite to them in the same way that they're polite to you.
Keir Starmer has got us into government with a big majority. He was completely clear before the election that he wasn't going to be able to do the two-child benefit policy, but I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't an early thing that comes along.
I went up to Gordon Brown and said, hello? No, yes, where is it? I said, found all these Tory candidates breaking land. Let me see it. This is brilliant.
Either way, he's a
Boris Johnson, just for the record, would say he's not a
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. Salma and Steve are still with us here in the studio. Let's have a look, Salma, at the front of the Times. A £10 billion boost. That's good news.
Yes, it is, but the Times have sort of put it as if the Bank of England is providing £10 billion. This is about fiscal tightening, easing. So that means the amount of money that's available in the system. When you're having quantitative easing, you are putting more money into the system. When you are having quantitative tightening, you are putting less money into the system. So this is Bank of England saying we're going to ease the tightening. So on the accounts, it looks like Rachel Reeves has got £10 billion more to spend. Now, this is going to create a bit of a political problem because there'll be lots of people who will be asking for lots of
pensioners,
things.
winter fuel payments.
Winter fuel. And so the Times is rightly pointing out that there are lots of Labour MPs who are going to be asking for things. She has a little bit more breathing space. And I will say, for a Chancellor in a tight economic position, about to give their first budget, this is probably really welcome news.
It just shows the madness of the pre-election tax and spend debate, where she was interviewed, so how do you find 10p for this and 20p in a black hole? Then suddenly £10 billion arrives, as often happens when you're in government. And if it manifests itself in the way that Salma suggests it might, and Salma thinks it might be even more than 10 billion, that is hugely useful. Now, there will be a huge debate about how she should use that money. And the Times suggests that she won't use it to spend. She'll use it to continue this sort of focus on balancing the books. If she makes that call, there will be quite a lot of concern about it. But let's see. But it's basically really good news for her if it's the case. She's only got 10 billion that she didn't expect to have.
Yeah, it's a good front page, isn't it, by the Times? Good story. OK, let's finish off this section with a look at the front of the Daily Mail. Steve, why don't you kick off with this? Mass immigration and woke culture putting our identity at risk.
Yeah, it's one of the classic headlines, a classic statement from Robert Jenrick, of course, standing for the Tory leadership. Every word needs clarification. What does he mean by English? What does he mean by identity? What does he mean by the threat? And so on. Is it English or British identity? We were talking beforehand. You know, this is 10 years since the Scottish referendum on independence. But he's just talking. So what does he mean by English? What is the threat?
Yeah.
So it gets a headline which will appeal to that readership, some of whom will have a vote in this leadership contest. It doesn't really tell us anything.
Well, he's standing to be the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. And as you say, you know, we've just marked the 10-year anniversary since the Scottish referendum vote for independence. So, you know, focusing on English identity, I think, is probably the wrong note to strike. I mean, look, I'm a Conservative Party member. I have a vote in this leadership contest, and judging by this headline, I certainly won't be voting for Mr. Jenrick.
Who do you want? Are you
well,
to tell us?
If Tom Tugendhat makes it to my ballot, he'll be getting my vote.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Steve?
What Salma's endorsement for Tugendhat? Well, I think that's very good news for Tom Tugendhat to have such a distinguished figure endorsing him. But I also agree with her reaction to this. I mean, it's such lazy playing to the gallery. You know, now admittedly that's the headline, but he knew this would be the kind of headline, and. But he's targeting this tiny electorate of Tory party members, of which Salma is one, and he knows what they want to hear. Whether this appeals to a wider electorate in 4 or 5 years' time.
Yeah, that's the question.
That is the question.
Yeah. OK, thank you both very much. Really fascinating getting your thoughts on all of that. I know you're sticking around. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, Hezbollah's leader threatens retaliation as Israel continues its attacks in Lebanon. All the details for you in a couple of minutes.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened